So we ended up losing our manufacturing base. And I'm not going to mention what really happened, because that people get mad at me when I bring it up. That a certain mayor gave a subway contract away to a foreign organization, when in fact the main company that was building these cars, and this is the complaint of the transportation workers, the guys who are riding the cars that are now, and what do they say? They're junk. Not as good as the old cars. And where were those cars made? In Philadelphia, there were some good. Because we were a manufacturing powerhouse, and this is, again, the maximum use of the people's assets. Taking our money and giving it to a foreign manufacturer to manufacture our rail cars is not the maximum benefit of the people, especially if you were trained in accounting. The numbers for that situation came out so that if you understood what the situation was, you understood that that company, Bud was the company, by the way, that should have gotten that contract. They actually had submitted the most responsible bid because they had higher costs. And what were those higher costs? Paying taxes to the city of Philadelphia government. So here we have a problem that is the non-strategic management of the assets of the people. In the world, there's a concept called asset-based community development. And what that means is that the local government is supposed to identify all things that can function as assets and develop a strategic plan that maximizes community development. This is not happening in Philadelphia. There's no place where this is discussed except 88.1 FM WPEB Philadelphia, a community radio station. And this would be a good time for me to remind people that we're listener supported. So you should go out to WPEB 88.1FM.org and make a contribution to keep us on the air, giving this information. I actually didn't know how many people were listening to this show. So someone in my church came up and told me, after I explained where I was going one Sunday afternoon, he said, "Oh, you're the guy I listened to." And I asked him, "Well, what do you think of the show?" He said, "Well, I try to catch it because y'all talk about stuff that nobody else talks about." And I said, "Oh, okay. Maybe we ought to keep that up." And going back to you, Bob, what do you want to add to us?
Well, I just wanted to add that you're actually informing me on some of the things that went that were behind the contract awardings of SEPTA, but also that SEPTA has refurbished some of their old trolleys built back in during World War II. So I guess that says something about the old manufacturing techniques, and something that we should look forward to again, bringing that sort of work back home.
Right, and that's exactly what we were talking about. How do we get our government? We own SEPTA, folks. We own SEPTA. SEPTA is supposed to work using our assets to our maximum benefit. And those old trolley cars, which were manufactured where? In Philadelphia, need to be refurbished by Philadelphia region workers.
Right now.
And right now. And what we should be doing is moving SEPTA to get involved with the process. When I sent you those white papers that I wrote in 2009, I was sitting there and I'm going, don't they know? I mean, everybody that I know knows that oil peaked in the United States in 1970. It peaked. And right after that, in 1973, became the first indication of the importance of energy, because the real wealth of ordinary people in 1973 is measured by the government. And you know that's really bad when the government tells you that you're losing money, because they don't want to do that. They want to keep acting like everything is okay, because who's ever in office wants to get reelected. So they want to pretend that everything is okay. But since 1973, without fail, every year, the real income statistic comes out. It's not put out with any fanfare, but the number is low for ordinary people in our society since 1973. And what happened in 1970? The United States reached peak production in fossil fuels. And every year thereafter, And we've been bringing in more of our fossil fuels from outside of the United States. And to do this, we have military presence where in the world? Every place where there's fossil fuels. So we are paying for the use of these fossil fuels is a double whammy. We're paying for it is what people are complaining about with the blood of our young people and out of our pocket. And it's not really benefiting us. But in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have a legal right to complain because our Constitution includes Article 27, where you have the right to question the misappropriation of your assets when they don't yield maximum benefit to you. This concept is something that we need to get across to everybody, unions and ordinary people, so they understand that it's their duty, unlike China, Iraq, Iran, and yes, even Europe. I love when people tell me about, oh, I want to think Europe is better than the United States. In Europe, when you owe the bank money, guess what they can do to you?
Repossess.
They can lock you up.
Put you in debtor's prison.
They can put you in prison.
Rights of English.
And they are trying to bring that madness to the United States, but because we have a real constitution, they've been working hard. They got us the Federal Reserve, but they haven't been able to get that thing in place, which is another issue that I'd like you to talk about a minute before.
Well, again, I mean, the Federal Reserve, people really don't know very much about it. The Federal Reserve was established in 1913 and has really unlawfully taken over much of the supply of our money, but it's done so through hidden means. But if anybody cares to question that, all you have to do is pull out a dollar bill and look what's on top. It is no longer a United States note, which it should be. If we're going to produce notes, it should be straight from the United States Treasury. It's from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not federal, and it has no reserves. What it is doing is creating money at the out of thin air, as much as they want, but that eventually dilutes the money supply, and we recognize that dilution as inflation. Inflation has run hot and cold at various times, but it's always run in one direction, and that's onward and upward. And every time your dollar is inflated, it destroys your purchasing power, and that makes it a hidden tax. So the Federal Reserve has been great at establishing a hidden tax on all of our money. Since 1935, the Federal Reserve note, has actually been devalued by 94 cents. So what you could buy for $1, then it only buys 4 cents now. So that should tell you how successful they have been. The Federal Reserve has been in actually taxing through hidden means the American people. The Federal Reserve, I believe, is the source of a lot of our frustrations, the frustrations of banking, getting loans for small businesses and so forth. The bailouts, the TARPs and so forth have been great for funneling money to big companies, and part of that money we have learned through the audit of the Federal Reserve has been to fund major media, which is actually illegal because that makes them sources of propaganda. And isn't that what we see? I mean, major media no longer covers major issues. It covers a selected number of issues that you have to come to the conclusion that, is a list given from a source that is not the people. So the Federal Reserve is very important, a lot more important than most people know, and I think that we eventually have to wake up and really fight against that because they're a hidden power that is causing a lot of destruction to our American way of life.
Last year, I anonymously started a petition called the National Lottery to End the National Debt, and I proposed that a national lottery be implemented and the money be cleared through a network of cooperative banks to be established in every state. And what this would do, by the way that I structured the proposal, is that people in each state would get the money, give it to them, by the state cooperative bank, which they would own. And once you started this process of taking a part of the proceeds and paying down the national debt, then eventually you can get it to the point where you could negotiate with the Federal Reserve, which is actually a private bank, the elimination of the national debt, pennies on the dollar. And what this will do is create a source of funding for small businesses that were controlled by the people of the United States. This is one of the major issues of our time. It's not getting any play. And I'm so glad to see that you knew from talking to your members that this was an issue. Because they had friends in small business who needed access to capital credit and couldn't get it. The classical story that I've never told, I won't say my uncle's name, but he used to have one of the largest manufacturing businesses in Philadelphia. And because he was a brother of color, when he went to the bank the first time to borrow money to start up his machine tool business, they told him, no, we're not going to give you that money. So what did he do to get the money to start his business? He claimed he was going to buy a Cadillac, and they gave him a $10,000 loan. Eventually, that $10,000 grew into what was the largest manufacturing business owned by a brother in Philadelphia. He had 300 people working. That's an example of the need of banking reform that's really personal that I know. So this is really another major issue that gets zero playtime on the major media, and isn't talked about at all. The structure of the Federal Reserve and the fact that we could, because it was set up by an act of Congress, now we can pass a law that says we're going to end national debt by setting up a national lottery. And because we still have money and people like to play the lottery, every state has a lottery. So we can set that up. We can set up a series that will fund the establishment of co-op banks, and we can solve another problem through this strategy. That is, the people would go to the local post office to buy the lottery tickets. Then we can allocate to the local post office an overhead allocation to keep them open, ending that crisis. And that is another major crisis that is getting zero playtime on the major media, and that's really a union issue, because the postal workers, that's one of the best unions in the world. So we need to propose strategies like this, and the only place, again, that this is going to happen is on community media.
If I could, what I also like to recommend, and this is ultra simple, is going right back to the bone. But if you'll recognize, I believe is Section 10 of the Federal Constitution, and I'm not sure which article it falls under. I believe it's Article 1. But actually, all states are supposed to only trade in gold and silver. And that is the only way to pay a debt under the Constitution. Almost no one knows of that. It is there. It has not been enforced in a long number of years. However, people should start to do that on their own. I mean, there are some proposals to at least allow gold and silver be offered as an alternative for paying for your goods and services. However, because of the possible destruction of the dollar, because I don't know if you understand what the Federal Reserve seems to be doing is weakening the dollar, and whether it's through the Federal Reserve or other nations getting suspicious of the dollar and they're decoupling from it. A large part of our stability, the dollar stability, has been because it is used to denominate all trades in oil. If that should change, and China and Russia look like they have struck some secret deals to do, or at least less public deals to do just that, the dollar becomes unmoored. What happens is that in other countries, their currency becomes completely debased. I mean, we talk about inflation of 5%, 10%, and that would be disastrous to us.